Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Psych Review. Today I'm here with Kim and Lisa, who co-wrote Race Relations in America and the Educational System. So where are the both of you from?
I grew up in New Jersey, so I lived here until I was about 14 years old in a very white town. Not a lot of diversity there, but then I moved to Maryland about 4 years ago, and the whole environment was completely different. It's actually one of the most diverse counties in America, so fun facts.
Cool. I was originally born in Russia, and then I moved around quite a bit in New Jersey, but I've been there my whole life, and kind of like Kim, I haven't been really exposed to a lot of diversity through that.
And how does this play into your research?
Okay, well, since the town that I grew up in was very white and not a whole lot of diversity, I had one black neighbor and everything, and not very a lot of people of color in my public school systems and anything like that. Not that I was really privy to the information as like a 10-year-old or anything, but now looking back on how I grew up, I can kind of see, like through research that I've read nowadays, such as like Efron and Knowles, they did a research paper discussing like how people in cohesive groups can, because they're in a cohesive group, so like where I lived a lot of white people, they then feel more comfortable of expressing their racist ideals and different things that you wouldn't really do if you're around a lot of other people different from you, that just a more comforting feeling. So I feel like I was able to really experience that through living, and even now living in Maryland, very diverse, there was kind of like a big opening up of the world of like, there's a lot of people that are different from me. I'm surrounded by all these different people that I was never really exposed to before, so it kind of really shows me all the privileges that I definitely had living in a white town.
And Lisa, what are your thoughts?
So I also kind of grew up in predominantly white towns, Piscataway, Edison, Westfield, and I originally moved there from Russia, but I've been in New Jersey for the majority of my life. And I think that what influenced me a lot was not like the places that I lived in, but my grandparents kind of experiencing this as well and seeing their different side of things. My grandparents are from Russia, they grew up there, they were born there, and for them, they didn't see anybody but white people, because Russia's just all white people. And so for them, coming to America to visit us and seeing people from other races was almost like a shock to them, because it's just something they didn't experience. And my grandparents were like racist kind of because of that. My sister goes to a predominantly white daycare and had a birthday party, and it was all white kids at her party, not like, it was just chance, you know what I mean? And I remember my grandma sitting there like looking at the kids and being like, "Isn't it great that there's no black kids here?" I was like, "Grandma, you can't say that. That's not an okay thing to say. Like, what would be wrong with black kids being there?" And I think like going through that in my childhood, and especially now as well, I kind of like realized that, wow, saying those things was wrong, because it was so blatant and so in my face.
What made the both of you interested in this topic?
So this topic was interesting to me because it was something that like through recent years has been like in my face a lot more, and it's just gotten me thinking about like how I've gotten to grow up and how other people grow up. And the biggest thing that really sparked my interest was actually Peggy McIntosh and her like white privilege questionnaire that she had, where she asked like questions for people to think about, and mostly it was for white people to acknowledge their privilege. And that's something I've never been forced to think about as a white person, because it's never been in my face that being white is a problem, because in our society it's really not, so like one of the things is like being able to walk into a supermarket and know that nobody's going to follow you because they think you're stealing. I never think about stuff like that, but other people do. And I think just having that stuff like in your face and having to think about it is what made me realize that that's important for people to realize, because kind of going off of that, I grew up in a very colorblind way. I didn't have to recognize that other races had problems because it didn't directly affect me. So that's why I think this topic was important.
And Kim, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree. I mean, like, definitely growing up and reflecting back on that, I can see how important this sort of thing is, and especially now that, white privilege is definitely more in your face than it has ever been in the past. Like, it's sort of something that I feel like needs to be talked about. And actually, in my research methods class, we read this article by Norton and Summers, and it's about how white people typically see this game of racism as a zero-sum game. So anything that minorities do to improve their living situation or anything, white people tend to see as like an attack on their own, and they tend to think that there's more white racism. And I thought that was like the most interesting thing to ever to hear this explanation, because I've seen in the news and I've seen different people talk about how all these things are anti-white, and I never really thought about it like that. So, actually reading this research and writing about this topic, was just super interesting to me to be able to understand, how other people think about all these different things.
How did you learn about racism?
Well, growing up again through a white neighborhood with a public school system with a lot of white kids, very few people of color or anything, I learned a very colorblind approach to racism. I never really understood what it meant to be black. I never understood the different cultures. Even in my own street, I had a black neighbor, and I would hang out with those kids all the time, and I would witness the daughter getting her hair braided and all that sort of thing, and I never really understood what that meant as a white person. I never even really asked. I was just fascinated at how they can make these little braids or anything. And she was even embarrassed to show me her coming out of the shower, her natural hair, because it's just kind of we just assimilate to this white culture, and it's so much easier to just assimilate yourself to this that you don't really understand the differences between all these other cultures, and you never really, at least I never really learned about that in school. Even through all these years, I still have never really discussed this is all the good things that have come out of this. This is the music that they create. This is the different things that represent certain things in their culture just because of their past. All I learned about was slavery, and Martin Luther King Jr. did the whole, speech and all that stuff. But it was very colorblind and denying and distancing yourself from yeah, that happened, but we're fine now. Everybody's not racist anymore, but these people were successful in what they did, but the society today is not like that at all anymore. And that's sort of what I learned in school, and that's why I found it interesting to read articles on how colorblindness and the ideologies behind that really work.
And Lisa?
So Kim and I had a lot of the same experience, and I think everyone had a lot of education in Black History Month in particular and all that. And I think that the biggest thing that, looking back now that I can remember is that I was taught about what all these Black people did that was great, like Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, but I never knew what it meant them being Black and doing that. You know what I'm saying? Where it's for me it was just wow, this person did this great thing, but there was no distinction between what if it wasn't Martin Luther King up there? What if it was a white man? It wouldn't be the same thing, and I think that that's something that is a problem with our education system right now, is that teachers don't know how to teach about this stuff because it is so uncomfortable, and you just don't want to end up offending people. Lazar and Offenberg did a study on this, on having teachers go through a course on being able to teach about racism, and how that did wonders for their classroom, to being able to talk about this stuff and what it means to be Black, what it means to be Hispanic, what it means to be anything, and it dives into that culture more instead of trying to assimilate it into white culture, which I think is a lot of the problem, especially with just learning about diversity and just multiculturalism in general. I remember learning about, kind of funny going back to braids, is what it meant to have braids during slavery and what that meant for Black people. And I didn't know that that was anything other than a hairstyle, but clearly it meant something more. It's just, nobody wanted to talk about it because it could be deemed as offensive. But the offensive thing is not talking about it.
So thank you for joining us today on Psych Review.
Thank you for having us.
It's great to be here.
Join us after this commercial break when we have Grisha, Nicole, and Emily talking about racial discrimination in the workplace.
Yeah.